Well, back now to the budget, back now to Jackie Long in Port Sunlight in Wirral South, who's been finding out if voters there are feeling the recovery.
Welcome back to the village of Port Sunlight on the Wirral. It now attracts many visitors, but was originally built in the late 19th century for workers at the Lever Brothers soap factory. Sunlight was their best-known soap. And Lever Brothers is now the global giant Unilever. Back then, though, William Lever was a philanthropist who built houses, a school and a cottage hospital for his workers. We're here in what used to be the women's ward of the hospital, and it's now a boutique hotel. And it's in the marginal constituency of Wirral South, held by Labour with a slim majority of 537 votes. So it'll be hotly contested in next year's general election. In a moment, we'll talk to people here about today's budget. But first, I've been finding out whether the Chancellor's optimism about economic recovery is shared by people here in Port Sunlight. They don't need any lessons in resilience here. The Port Sunlight Lyceum Brass have been going for more than 40 years. They're all in work here, unemployment's not the issue. It's making wages stretch that's been the challenge over the last few years. And for all the talk out of Westminster that the country's now in recovery, well, here they say, talk is pretty much all it is.
There's certainly a north-south divide. The figures seem in the right direction and certainly better than perhaps was expected 12, 18 months ago. But in practice, I'm not sure yet that there's any real practical feel in the high street. Working
for the NHS, we've only had a 1% rise in our wages in the last few years and a pay freeze a couple of years back, and that 1% rise has actually been said we're not having it this year. So with the cost of living going up by more than 1%, how are we meant to balance that out with our wages?
All three will benefit from the rise in personal tax allowance, but they hoped for something more.
When you're living on your own in a house that costs a small fortune, everything costs a small fortune, and you struggle.
Making people feel good is still the aim at Port Sunlight's former cottage hospital, now a luxury hotel and spa. For owner Craig Barker, there were no surprises in the budget. He's more than happy with the direction the Chancellor's taking.
I definitely feel that the guests that come through the door here are out of this psychological negativity that was there, and the fact that people are now coming out and spending again tells me that psychologically, whether they realise it or not, they are out of it.
Upstairs, and one of his housekeepers, Janet Miles, is unconvinced anything's changing for her.
The bills are all going up. Gas, electric, everything. I mean, they say the food price is slowly coming down, but I haven't seen that.
What she'd really like is a minimum wage of £7 an hour. What difference would that make, taking it up to £7 an hour?
A great difference. A great difference. I could do a lot more, just with that little extra.
People on basic wage, minimum wage, I think relatively is slightly high, whereas people in middle
I think the minimum wage is slightly high.
Relative. So,
because the problem for those people on it is they think it's not high enough. We spoke to Janet making beds upstairs. She'd love it to go up to £7.
Absolutely, and so would I. But it's all relative to the business that comes through the door.
Today's budget was clearly focused not on people spending, but on people saving. But to save, you have to have something left over in the first place.
You get your wages and it's just paying out all the time. And there's nothing really left to do anything else with.
There's no doubt that the government had good economic news to deliver today. But the big question is why many people here aren't hearing it or feeling it yet. Well, we'll hear more from the brass band later, but here now to talk about how they're feeling about the state of the economy are people who live and work in Port Sunlight. Beverly Rowe, you're a local businesswoman. You do believe the government's good news is good news for you too, don't you?
Well, I think the two key points, as far as I'm concerned, are that the unemployment is falling and the growth is rising. So hopefully that will give a feeling of optimism, really, to customers in my line of business, really.
And you are feeling that in terms of more customers coming through?
Yes, we are. We've noticed quite an increase in turnover over the last year or so. So hopefully it'll continue.
I mean, Bill Harris, you're retired.
Yes.
The Chancellor today, growth is up, unemployment is down. Why don't you share Beverley's optimism, the Chancellor's optimism?
Because there's never any investment into the Wirral, Liverpool, Cumbria. And we need some serious investment put in here to bring industry back in here to give our kids.
I mean, what about HS2? The government has said, you know, it's going to press into the north, it's going to press into the north much more quickly.
It's not going to bring engineering here, and it's not coming to the Wirral, and it's not coming to Liverpool.
And you think much more needed to be done for working people, for the unemployed? I
certainly do, but I think the government are only interested in London. And I think anything north of Watford, they're not really particularly interested in.
I mean, Lynn Langshaw-Parr, you're retired and a saver. A bumper budget for you, isn't it?
Extremely, with the low interest rates as they are now, and to get more tax-free savings, what more could we ask? A little bit higher would be good, but yes, it's safe saving and tax-free, what more can?
And the changes to pensions too?
Changes to pensions, especially the pension bond they've mentioned. That's going to be a big saving for all of us.
So you would buy one when it's time? I know it's not now.
Not quite yet, but yes, straight away.
I mean, the cynics are saying this is all political, this is all about targeting the silver vote, as it's called, for the Tories. Does this encourage you, would this encourage you to vote Tory?
I don't think of it as Tory, it's coalition to me.
So this is a coalition policy that you're quite pleased about?
It's not just Tory. No, I think a joint effort, and it's come out well for the likes of myself, retired, and a saver.
But would you vote Conservative, because after all, election next year?
Not necessarily.
Still not convinced?
Not convinced. I think it's a good idea that there's two parties working together, and I think that's why it's worked out so well for most of us.
Bill, you clearly don't feel it's worked out well for everybody.
No, I don't. And I used to vote Conservative, but I'll be voting UKIP in the next general election.
You see, that's interesting, because many people are saying you are exactly who this budget is targeted at. Disgruntled Tory who's gone over to UKIP. This is supposed to lure you back. Why hasn't it worked?
Because, as I say, there's no investment in the northwest. We live in one of the most deprived places. The kids here have got no real future unless we get some jobs, into the town and into the area. High Speed 2 is not going to do that.
Beverley, that doesn't chime with you, what Bill's saying, or do you recognise some of it?
Well, I can understand what Bill's point about the north. I mean, we have felt a bit neglected up here, I think. Obviously, if this train link does materialise, then I don't know whether it's actually going to be beneficial for business or whether it's going to be more for commuters, really. So I think I'm yet to wait and see about that.
So in terms of the politics of all of this, Katie O'Hanlon, you're a public sector worker. In many ways, this is a budget being seen to help people like Lynn. She's pretty pleased with it. What are your thoughts about whether he's done enough for you?
He certainly hasn't. I don't think he's done enough for most working families. There's very small increases in help for childcare, but that's only up to the age of children of 5. A minimal increase in the rate of income tax, but nothing at all for working families.
So do you think that you've been sacrificed in a way in favour of the pensioners? There's an awful lot of talk about a generational divide.
Absolutely. Year after year, the pensioners have been protected in the budget for the votes, and working class, working people have just been overlooked time and time again.
So what would it take to convince you that the Conservatives, the coalition government next time, would be one you would vote for? Because you're traditionally a Labour voter.
Yeah. Cost of living rises in our pay packets, keeping the public sector public.
I mean, you'll benefit from the rise in personal tax allowance?
we will, but at the same time, public sector pension contributions are increasing, so that will immediately be swallowed up, so there will be no extra money in our pocket.
Craig, we saw you in the piece. You're pretty optimistic, delighted with what the government are doing. Do you understand how someone like Katie feels?
Yeah, I do understand, but I think the issue now is that people aren't feeling it yet in their pocket. I think subconsciously people are unconsciously feeling more confident, but they're not feeling it in their pocket
yet. But why is that, though?
I think we are at the end of a recession, but I think we're now in a psychological recession, and I think there's probably another 12 months, 2 years of it. And but I think ultimately people can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it is getting better.
OK, thank you to you. Thank you to all of you. After the break, assessing the budget, who's winning and who's losing.